On November 9, 1975, the largest cargo freighter on the Great Lakes at the time, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, was hauling a 26,000-ton load of iron ore from Superior, Wisconsin to Zug Island near Detroit, Michigan. It would join the SS Arthur M. Anderson in a shared route across Lake Superior. The National Weather Service had predicted a storm would pass south of Lake Superior at around 7 a.m. on November 10th. The captains of the two ships decided to take a common route across the southern half of the lake. At 7 p.m. on November 9th, the National Weather Service altered its predictions about the storm to indicate that it would likely cross the lake instead of passing south of it, and issued gale warnings at that time. The Edmund Fitzgerald altered its course to proceed northward toward Ontario, Canada, hoping the path would give some shelter from the storm, but the ship faced increasingly high wind speeds, which by 1 a.m. on November 10th were reported to be around 60 miles per hour, with waves roughly 10 feet high. Visibility was reduced as snow began to fall at around 2 p.m. on November 10th, and by 3:30 p.m., Captain McSorley reported the Edmund Fitzgerald was beginning to take on water as well as damage to vents and fencing, which resulted in two of the ship's 6 bilge pumps beginning to run constantly to discharge the ship's water. The ship also lost both of its radars at around 4 p.m. At one point, Captain McSorley also indicated that the ship had developed what is called a list, where the ship tilts to one side at equilibrium with no external force acting upon it. If the list comes to a point where it cannot be corrected to remain afloat, the ship will eventually capsize and sink. The Arthur M. Anderson attempted to assist the Edmund Fitzgerald with navigation by radioing radar information and directing it toward Whitefish Bay, west of Sault Ste. Marie. The United States Coast Guard issued a warning that day that the Soo locks had been closed and all approaching ships should seek safe anchorage. At 4:39 p.m., McSorley radioed the Coast Guard at Grand Marais, inquiring about whether or not the lighthouse and navigation beacon at Whitefish Point were operational, and the Coast Guard indicated that both instruments were inactive. By 4:52, winds were reported at over 60 miles per hour, with waves of over 25 feet, and rogue waves even reaching an estimated 35 feet. About an hour later, gusts of over 80 miles per hour were reported by the Arthur M. Anderson. By 7:10 p.m., the Arthur M. Anderson reached out to the Edmund Fitzgerald and asked them about their status. The Edmund Fitzgerald radioed back that they were holding their own, but they were never heard from again. No distress signal was ever sent by the ship, and 10 minutes later, the Arthur M. Anderson was no longer able to see the Edmund Fitzgerald on radar or reach them by radio. The Arthur M. Anderson had attempted to reach out to the Coast Guard on the distress frequency, but due to complications and damage from the weather, they were asked to reach out on another frequency, and the urgency of the situation was not clear at that time. The ship was asked by the Coast Guard at around 9 p.m. to turn around and search for survivors of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Then eventually a request was made to have the ships in the area aid in the search, but the conditions made things difficult. Although debris from the ship was found, including lifeboats and rafts, none of the crew was ever discovered. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank sometime after 7:10 p.m. on November 10, 1975, and is the largest ship ever to sink in the Great Lakes. And a fun little factoid is that from 1816 to 1975, at least 240 ships were lost in the Whitefish Point area alone. The wreckage was found later in November of 1975 by sonar 17 miles from the mouth of Whitefish Bay in international waters in two pieces on the floor of the lake at a depth of roughly 530 feet, which was confirmed in May of 1976 by an unmanned submersible and multiple expeditions in the decades that followed, including manned exploration of the wreckage, where video footage was recorded. Although there are many theories, there have been no definitive conclusions about the exact cause of the wreck outside of the obvious weather conditions. All 29 men aboard the ship perished as a result of the wreck. Multiple lawsuits were filed and settlements were made, resulting in payments to surviving families. In August 1976, Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot released The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald as a memorial song, the lyrics of which covered high-level details of the events related to the tragic incident. Given that the song was written less than a year after the event, the original song contains some omissions, inaccuracies, and conjecture about the events, which Lightfoot has made efforts to correct with rewrites for his live performances. The song is still amazing, by the way. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald is featured prominently in the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, including the bell recovered from the wreck. The United States Coast Guard's investigation of the sinking resulted in multiple recommendations and regulations being implemented, including multiple requirements for cargo ships to have technologies aboard, including depth finders, special survival suits and life jackets with strobe lights, advanced navigation systems, emergency beacons with position indicators, and many other improvements to processes related to inspection and predictions impacting ships. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald shipwreck occurred 49 years ago today, and it still has maintained a cultural impact on our society.